Ready? Good to go?
Good to go.
All right. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome. Today is November 21st. It's a Thursday, 2019. Welcome to our weekly Drumline Chops executive meeting. Let's go around the table. We'll introduce everybody.
Hey, this is Eric Caraway, founder and owner of Percuss.io. It's about 8 o'clock at night here in Stuttgart, Germany.
And then down below.
What's up, everybody? This is Carl Arietta, aka Carl Drum Tech, here in Torrance, California. It's almost 11 a.m. here at this time.
And my name is William Pan, coming to you from Cupertino, California, back in the home studio here. And we're really excited that you guys are joining us today for today's video lesson. So every week we meet as an executive team for Drumline Chops. And a couple weeks ago, we decided we're going to try something where we let you in on some of our meeting topics, but also this month we're trying out some of these like special topic sessions where we choose something that based off of what we're hearing from our Drumline Chops community, questions that we could answer. A lot of times we do these answers directly one-on-one with our viewers, but we're trying to find a way to where we can share more of this information with more people. If these are questions that we think, former students of ours have had or colleagues of ours have, that we can capture it on video for you, we can share it. And we're just so glad you're joining us today for this video. So today's topic is titled 10 Strategies for Memorizing Music. Recently, we received a question to the direct messages saying, I want to learn this piece of music. How do I even begin to start memorizing it? So we've got 10 items here. I'm going to kind of lead us through each of these topics, but we're going to stop at multiple points throughout. Carl and Eric are going to chime in, and hopefully we can give you some massive value as you try to memorize your music here in about the next 20-25 minutes. So let's start with why, guys. Why would you memorize music? I know a lot of people say that they prefer to memorize music. Some instrumentalists, it's not part of their natural workflow, but let's just throw it out there first. What's the first few things that come to mind as like why someone would want to or needs to or should consider memorizing their music?
I think for me, like my background as a keyboard percussionist, in some situations it's just necessary, like note accuracy improves when you can look at the keyboard. And if you're looking at the keyboard, sure, there's an extent of like, peripheral vision that you can employ to look at the music and look at the notes or the bars at the same time. But at a certain point, if it's something you're preparing for a recital, yeah, you really have to memorize it to get to that next level of note accuracy.
Agree. Carl, what about you?
I guess from a marching band perspective, I mean, it's kind of hard to march around with a piece of music like this. At the same time, you got to figure out, I got to be over at that yard line. Like,
I feel like as the drumline instructors or players, we realize that we just have to do it. But I've definitely seen the horn player or wooden player trying to hold their music. If they don't have their lyre, they forgot it, and they're like sitting there trying to read their music and play, and they're crashing into people around them. Not
these days it's probably on their phones now, right?
I haven't seen anyone do that yet, but I'm sure somewhere someone is, right? So there's definitely a need for that if you're in the marching percussion specific realm. A few things that I've written down here. I think as you memorize the music, it definitely frees up some of your energy and awareness that you have available to you, right? I feel like your brain is basically like the RAM inside your computer. There's only so much you can process at once. So if some of that music is automatized, then you don't have to think about like, what's the next part coming up here? And for me, at least, that frees up some of the listening awareness that you have for yourself and the people around you. Maybe you can pay attention more to your sound, to some of the dynamic expression. If you're getting a piece of comment, feedback from the staff, if you're stressed about the music, especially like this is audition season, right? If you're stressed about the music, there's no way you're going to be able to think about that little technical adjustment that they gave you because you're stressed out. You're maxing out your RAM trying to think about what's coming up next. In that keyboard percussion note, I also find that as an audience member, when there's no music stand between me and the performer, even though it's a physical barrier, I think it does offer up a little bit of a wall between the performer and the audience, right? So as a performer, if you want to be able to connect with your audience more, I think not having that music stand, obviously there are cases where you need to have the stand for some reason or something's going on. But in instances where I see a performer who doesn't have that music stand, I do feel like I'm able to connect with what they're doing a little bit more. So
yeah, it's a little bit more of a mystique, like so much of percussion is visual. And if it's memorized, I think it is more engaging. And also just kind of like a standard, how like it is more common, I think, for percussion than maybe some other instruments. Like it's kind of a standard. If you're going to go to a wind recital, like, they're probably going to have a stand up there. They're probably going to be reading the music. But I feel for some instruments, piano being an example, like it's just like the standard is that it's memorized.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, on that note, when you're performing with other musicians, it's not so much that the stand is a barrier between you and the audience. It could also be a barrier between you and the other performers. If both players or the quartet or the quintet, they all know the music so well that they're actually able to look at each other as they're playing, that's going to affect the synergy that's happening between the performers on stage as well. Okay, so you're watching this video, you're convinced, I need to memorize my music. I've got the audition coming up, marching band season's coming up. I need to memorize music. What should I do? And I can relate this to a time where when I was in college, I thought memorizing the music just meant repping it over and over and over and over again until somehow magically it got absorbed into you, right? Or it got into your muscle memory. And what we're going to say is like your muscles don't actually have any memory into them, right? That phrase you hear all the time. But there are things that you can do strategy-wise to help you be able to recall, have that music inside of you so that as you're playing, you're able to express it the way that you want to. So I would say the first thing, we're going to break this out into 2 chunks, okay? So the first half is going to be about learning the music, the things that you can do while you're actually seeing the music for the first time, starting to incorporate the notes into your hands and understanding what it is that you're playing. And I think if you do some of these things in this first phase of learning, it'll help you avoid some of those pitfalls in the second phase, which is the phase where you're actually trying to memorize the music for the performance, for the gig, for the audition. So I would say before you get started, this is very important. You need to grab a pencil. And I see this all the time with my students because as you're learning the music, you're figuring things out within the score. You should be making notes yourself as you see some of these connections that we're going to be talking about. I think the markings that you see on the music is a visual representation of the work that's being done in the practice room by yourself. So I tell students all the time, if your music, it looks like it just came off the printer and it's clean when you show up in your lesson, okay, so we'll mark it up during the lesson. When I come back, if you have not added any additional markings to the music, then I don't see the work that you're doing, right? So as you're self-practicing, get that pencil. That's going to be one your best ally as you're learning the music. So let's jump right into it. Number 1, this is I would say maybe not as a obvious one to me, and I remember exactly when I learned this strategy, but strategy number 1 is to study and analyze the music. When I mean study and analyze music, that means you're looking at the big picture sections, the vocabulary that's being used within the music. I recently attended a parental conference day at my daughter's early education center, like preschool. And the teachers were explaining to us how they teach students about, the world basically, or like things around the world. They said that when they explain like where we live, for example, what city we're in, if it's Cupertino, California, they don't say like, hey, you live in Cupertino, California. They start with the big picture first. Like, here's the solar system. These are the planets in the solar system. And then within the solar system, here's planet Earth. And on planet Earth, here are the continents. And within the continents, here's the country. And here's the state. And here's the city. So that there's context for where they're digesting this main piece of information, which is what city we're living in. I think the same thing applies to music. If you're just learning it beat by beat or bar by bar, but you don't know what the overall context of the piece is, the form of the music, where you're going to end up, where the peaks and the valleys are of the music, then you don't have context for how to place what it is that you're learning at that moment. What do you guys think about that? Or do you incorporate some sort of studying or analyzing into your learning phase?
Yeah, for me, I tend to lean, I think, heavily on the kind of analysis part of it. Yeah.
I think when I first heard about this, I remember it was an undergrad, and Tom Burrett, Professor Burrett, if you're watching this, shout out to Dr. Tom Burrett. He's the one that said that for me at least, that before he sits down and starts learning the piece of music, he gets a bird's eye view of the form, right? And if you look at it, you might go like, oh, it's a ABA form. So that third part is going to be just like the first part. So I just need to learn these 2 parts now, really. Oh, and where is it different between the first A and the second A, right? Or maybe you're analyzing it harmonically. It's like, oh, this whole section is just over E minor chord. So now I don't have to think about the harmony for this part. It just goes here. Or, oh, this is a 1, 4, 5, 2, 6, 1 progression, but oh, there's a diminished 7 chord here. I didn't remember. So that's where some of the theoretical analysis can help. Now, how would you apply this to some rudimental percussion if you're analyzing the music for rudimental percussion? Maybe you look at the score and you say, okay, this section is a big unison moment. This is the arrival point. So I see now that we're building from here up to this part. This whole section, it's really important why the dynamics matter here, because it's a big build basically from here all the way to this middle section. Or in this section, this is a highly exposed moment where it's just the snare feature. that part has to be perfect because, you know, if it's not, everyone and their mom's going to know that that part's not right. So I think understanding where you are in the context is going to affect the way you learn it. Carl, do you have anything to add to that for marching percussion wise, how studying or analyzing might incorporate into your learning process?
Yeah, I think it's just one of the best things you can do probably when you first get a piece of music is kind of skim through it and just, you know, mentally like read it and play through it in your head, you know, and yeah, make those mental notes about like, you know, okay, this part looks a little complicated. I'm going to have to make sure I spend some time on this one. Okay, next thing. Okay, there's some 5-lits. Oh, I'm not very familiar with those. Let me, you know, make sure that I take the time to learn what that's all about. So skimming and scanning, I think when you first get it is going to be very helpful.
So on that note, as you're, oh, Eric, do you want to have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say like just this idea of like, you know, thinking about form and structure. It's interesting how some educators we've worked with in the past, like the way that they run rehearsal and like talk about the different sections of music. Like it could be very easily like, oh, start at measure 54 or start at the snare break. But some people will say like, oh, let's start at the recap or the coda or that, you know, the start of the development section, or think about it in this big, you know, form, and everything is like, you know, a part of the structure, a part of the form, and start using musical vocabulary to describe.
Always trying to elevate the level of musician in behavior and in thought within our students, right? And the vocabulary that we choose to use. Okay, so number 2 we have is create an auditory goal, right? You know that once you know a piece of music, if you play a wrong sticking or you play a wrong voicing or you hit a wrong note on the keyboard, you immediately know that's a wrong note, right? But that only happens once you know what the piece of music is supposed to sound like. So if it's a well-known piece of music that you can catch a performance video of already online, I would say take advantage of that because then you have an idea of what it's supposed to sound like. If it's a new piece of music that maybe it was arranged or written specifically for your group or you're premiering a work, then you're the person that needs to create your own auditory goal of what it's supposed to sound like. And so that means you need to go slowly and learn it correctly the first time, because we've all been there where you learned it wrong and then you thought it was right until you showed up in your lesson, and then your teacher's like, no, you're playing this part wrong. You're like, ah, you know, you've been hearing it wrong in your head for how many weeks now. And so it's so important that number 2, that you have an auditory goal of what it's supposed to sound like. And I would say not just right notes, right rhythms, but also dynamics, expression, voicing, you know, how you can phrase certain things. The more musically vivid you can make that auditory goal, the better setup you're going to be later on as you work towards reaching that goal. Number 3, break it down. So you've analyzed it now. You have an auditory goal of what's supposed to sound like. Now you need to start breaking it down into chunks of how you're going to learn it. For me, if I'm looking at a piece of music, man, I was looking at some of the licks guys on Drumline Chops the other day. I was like, I'm going to learn one of these licks and make a video around how I would use Drumline Chops. The licks are just like so hard. Some of the vocabulary, I was like, I don't want to learn how to do the sticky, tricky, flippy thing part. Like, I think I was watching Ichi Kobayashi. What is the
Kichi?
Yeah. Kichi, thanks, Kichi Kobayashi. And he did like this little sticky, tricky thing at the very end of the video, and I was like, oh god, this is so outside my wheelhouse. I'm like slowed it down to 60-50%. You know, I'm like, okay, there's a flip and the turn, and I got it after like 5 or 10 minutes of like watching it, and I was like, I'm tired. This is too much. But as I'm looking at the music now I know like, okay, the first 2 lines, okay, there's some buzz stuff. Okay, that's a skill set that maybe I need to work the flame accent with the buzzes. But I also know that, and I've broken it down, that little sticky, tricky thing at the very end is something that, for me personally, I would need more time to delegate to that portion in order to learn it, right? So when you're learning a piece of music, know which parts are going to be more difficult than others so that you can allocate more time for the more difficult sections. And then, you know, you can kind of gauge how you're going to be allocating your time for those parts. Okay, number 4, consider the context. Okay, and so this means as you're learning a phrase of music, how many of us have experienced this where you're playing a piece of music and then you get to that next section and you freeze, like you freeze in that transition to the B section, or you're going from one line to the next line and you haven't figured out how to make it a smooth and connected musical phrase, right? So a lot of times, the example that I'm thinking of here is there was a section that a student was learning, and it was some sort of like paradiddle, diddle, roll figure going into crescendoing into some loud fortissimo section, right? So that you know you're doing all this little fast, quick, technical twitch muscle action going into it, but all of a sudden you get to these big open rhythms in the arrival section. you're going to have to switch the mechanics to get into that section, but also knowing where it's coming from is going to affect the way you start that section when you're actually learning it and rehearsing. And number 5, logging correct repetitions. This is the last comment for this section, but I think logging correct repetitions is going to facilitate these first 4 points that we've talked about. Considering the context, how you're going to break it down, that auditory goal. You just want to make sure that, if you were video recording yourself and you're doing it wrong 7 times and then you do it right 1 time and then you go on, the chances of that correct repetition sticking with you are slim to none, right? You have to make sure that you're going slow enough so that you're building the right habits. You have that right auditory memory in your mind. And if you invest in this time slowly at the beginning, then you have a better chance of speeding it up later and then having those correct habits, both auditory and technically, musically in place. So guys, anything that you want to chime in here, or anything that you could add into to kind of enrich this for our listeners out there before going to the second section?
I want to point out that you have this first section, I think, strategically placed before the second section. Often, I think an important thing to remember is don't try to memorize it too early and end up memorizing something incorrectly. Learn it, memorize it.
There's actually a really great post that I think Daniel Ascari has on his website, which is Hype the Clean. And it's on this memorizing post. And he says something about how a lot of times students, when they memorize too quick in the beginning, they're not referencing the music. They just memorize it. And then once it's memorized, they say, oh, I have to memorize it. They don't go back to the music. And it's kind of like a game of telephone that they've played with themselves, right? Where they learn it and then it starts to morph a little bit, or they add an extra note, or they change the sticking a little bit, but they haven't gone back to reference the video or the music beforehand, and they learn it incorrectly. So, Carl, there are 4 of you or 2 of you on the screen now. There's 4 of us in this meeting.
How do I log out the other one?
In the frozen screen, I don't know if it disappeared. I don't know if it's going to show up at the replay, but you were looking over here. I was like, wow, Carl's really concentrating on these talking points I sent over. He's looks really focused.
Carl froze.
Yeah. Internet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Carl, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this first section before we move on to the second section. I don't know how much of it you caught, but if, breaking things down, considering the context. The 5th one that I talked about was just logging correct repetitions. What do you find yourself telling your students most often when they're learning music?
I think one of the things that, that came to mind, when teaching students is I have one particular student where a lot of times, he thinks the rhythm is one way when it's actually another way. And he's just really stuck on that, the wrong way. Mm-hmm. So it's just that highlights the importance of you gotta be able to read the correct rhythm, play it correctly. It can mess you up if you have this idea in your head of what you think it is, and then you're stuck on that, and it takes a while to kind of get out of that, because every single time you do the reps, you're doing the thing that you think it is, and it's nope, that's not it. That's not it. So logging the correct repetition, knowing and executing the right thing is so important, from the start.
In the phrase that I associate with that goal, which is logging correct repetitions, that I have to constantly tell my students and constantly tell myself, is just to play slower. 9 times out of 10, it's just if you just played it slower, you'd hit more right notes, and it would be more correct. Right. Although, as I've gotten older, and this maybe is a topic for later, I find myself flipping between performance tempo and super, super slow tempo, more frequently within even just a 2-minute practice window, right? Whereas many years ago when I first started, I would say I would start slow and just stay slow forever, and then gradually ramp it up over time as I got closer to the performance. And now I find myself saying I might just do a rep at performance tempo and just have it be bad, but at least now I have an idea of what it's going to be eventually, so that when I go back to slow, I can say that kind of goes back to the first thing, which is studying and analyzing. You have a context of what you're working towards in the end. So.
Or I look at it as when they play something at performance tempo, and then it's instead of me pointing out the parts that are not great, I can just be hey, let's slow this down. And then for me, it's equivalent to let's take out the magnifying glass and see what's really going on here, and then find all the errors. That's for both the teacher and the student.
Yeah, great point. Okay, let's move into the second section. And just real quick, I just want to mention that if logging correct repetitions, if this practice thing is something that you find yourself practicing, you're this is always the nightmare for the teacher, is like, you have a student, they don't see improvement and say, oh, you need to practice more. And then the nightmare is you have a student that says like, I'm practicing 3 hours a day and I'm not getting better. So it's not an effort issue. It's just like, where are they spending their time? I do have a free handout. It's 5 strategies for how to practice better on my website. I'll put a link of that in the description down below here, but it's a free handout if you want some more practice strategies for learning music. Let's move into the memorizing music section. And this is probably the part that most people who are watching this video were interested in. I do think that preliminary stuff, as Eric mentioned, is important because it's setting you up for the second phase. But okay, now you've done all those things and now you're going to try to memorize the music. What are the things that you should be doing? The first thing I've written down is relate it to what you know. So everything that we learn, that we assimilate into kind of our knowledge bank, is being filtered through our past experiences, right? So a lot of times if you're looking at a piece of music and you've done your analyzing, you say like, oh, this is a paradiddle, 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 diddle, paradiddle, 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 diddle, dot. You recognize that. That's a piece of vocabulary that you're already familiar with. All 3 of us, if we saw that, we'd be like, okay, got it. That part's done. We're moving on, right? So you want to relate it to things that you already know, which is also one of the advantages of like the more music you learn, the more music that you read, the quicker you're going to be able to learn music. I've noticed that as I've gotten older, I don't know if this has happened to you guys, but it's harder for me to memorize and learn music now. I think my brain is just getting older and slower, and I'm not, doing it 6 hours a day like I used to be when I was younger. But I do have a friend specifically, Billy Spicer, who tells a story about like when he was in high school, he had this gigantic binder. It was like one of those 3-inch ring binders, and he would just collect music, and Billy was the guy who used to like, hey, Billy, play Crossman 83. And he'd be like, oh, and he would just play the lick, right? And the story he tells is he would collect all this music, and after school, there'd be days where he would just play through the entire binder in like one afternoon, right? And so he's reading, he's playing, and he starts to absorb all this vocabulary. Every composer has their style, right? The vocabulary that they tend to use. So the more of these different styles of vocabulary that you have kind of in your toolbox, when you see something and you can relate that to like, oh, that's a this style, or that's a this style, or these are triple rules, related to things that you already know, it's going to help you learn the music faster. Number 7, practice recall. So really, when you're memorizing music, what you're really doing is you're setting things up in your brain to where you can recall the information without any lag or any delay as you're pulling up the information, right? And so part of that is you have to actually practice recalling the music. If you're just staring at the music all the time, which is great, you're developing your sight reading skills, as Eric alluded to earlier, you're playing on the keyboard, you're looking at the music, and you don't have to look at the keyboard. You have to do this like game with yourself, which is like, let's say you have like a 5 repetition sequence. Maybe you play it 5 times, and then the next round, you're going to play it 4 times, and then on that 5th time, you're going to look away from the music and see if you can recall the music. And you're like, oh, that wasn't very good. So you do it again, and then you start to move that fader to where you're looking at the music less, and then you're looking away from the music more. So you can practice that recall, because every time you do one of those reps, you're getting immediate feedback of like, oh, you don't know what the sticking is or what the notes are for that last bar of music. Maybe you need to zoom in and target that section for a little bit, right? And the practicing recall can be the notes that you're trying to play. It could be also, because you're not looking at the music now, you can look at your hands and you can see the shape, whether it's like where your hands are laying on the instrument, how you're moving from this chord to that chord, that motion now. So you can practice recalling not just the theoretical, but also the kinesthetic memory of how you're moving as you're playing the music. Anything to add to that, guys?
I know, like for me, I like to do what I call forced recall on my students. In that, like
that sounds abusive, Carl.
I know. That's the kind of teacher I am. As you see. Like there's so many times where I have students like they're learning something on the page, and their eyes are just locked in on the music. They're doing that, and they're doing it like rap after rap after rap, and I'm just like, okay, do this. Take out the music. Like, don't stop looking at music. Go. And then, like, they'll be surprised, like, oh, I know it already.
I know Kung Fu.
And it's like, dude, like, it's like you know it better than you think you do.
Mm-hmm.
And, in this situation, I forced you to recall it, force it to see the music in your head because you've already seen it so many times, and you have those reference experiences of playing stuff like that before. So, don't doubt yourself in that moment, and just as soon as possible, try to stop yourself from looking at the music so you can like learn it faster. But if you're just sitting there like thinking, oh, I don't know it, because you're just like focused on looking at the music the whole time, then it's going to take longer.
Show me.
Yep, absolutely. So maybe on that note, as you're learning music and you look away, the next step, number 8, I've written down, is to gradually add on. So let's say you've learned these first 8 bars. It's a musical phrase. You can play it slowly, cleanly. You're playing on the right stickings. It looks and sounds the way you want it to. Now you're trying to recall it, and you look at the music, you don't look at the music. You look at the music, you don't look at, and you're folding when you look away from the music. So maybe what you need to do is you need to just start and break it down. So you're just going to memorize the first bar now. I had this issue in high school where I could look at a piece of music, I'd play it, it'd go in my eyes, I'd play it, and then you'd be like, what did you just play? I'd be like, I have no idea what I just played, right? And so you have to practice saying like, okay, I'm just going to play the first bar. Bum, digga, duck, go, digga, digga, duck. Okay, and then you look away. Bum, digga, ding, gong, digga, digga, duck. Dum, digga. And if you can do it, let's say 10 times in a row correctly, okay, you got it. Nice job. Go back to the music. And what I would do is try to play just that first bar without looking at the music, and then I would start looking in the second bar. So bum, digga, dum, boom, digga, digga, dum, digga, 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 and then you go on and you play the next part, right? Then you say, I'm going to memorize the first 2 bars. So you look at the second bar, you memorize it. Once that's memorized, you go back to the first bar, you tack that on, and you have those 2 bars memorized. You repeat the process. You look away, got it. Then you look away for the first 2 bars. Then you look back for bars 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you're still building the correct habits for bars 3 through 8. And if you just, it's not like a secret. So it's not rocket scientist. It's just, being very diligent and intentional with how you're sequencing things for yourself. And as you gradually build on, eventually you'll have those 8 bars memorized.
Don't be afraid too to go the opposite direction. Start on measure 8 and then memorize that, and then do 7 and 8, then do 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think we always, you get a brand new piece of music. Everybody wants to start at measure 1, and what inevitably happens, everybody knows their opener better than their closer. So start at the end, because it kind of goes against the way that we normally practice and evens things out a little bit.
That's a great teaching tip too, Eric. I think you mentioned earlier about, how rehearsals are being run. A lot of times just to mix things up with your students, you say, hey, we're going to start at the end today and we're going to work backwards. Mm-hmm. So you start chunking it, and then by the end, you've done everything backwards, and then you can do the full run. And, it changes things up for the students and for the teacher. Okay, number 9, visualize and audiate the music. So visualizing, this comes from my friend Jason Pena, who now plays in the Marine Drum and Bugle Corps. But I remember when we were marching together at Cavaliers, he said that when he plays music, he can actually visually see the music scrolling across in his mind, in his eyes. So he's recalling a visual memory of the music. And then I was like, what? I rely on what it sounds like and how it feels. Mm-hmm. And he's actually seeing the music scroll across his eyes as he's playing. And I realized that it's something that you can actually practice and develop that skill of doing that. But the audiating of the music, and this actually, I think part of it comes from Eric too. I remember when Eric, I know you've got some things to say about this, Eric, was the first time we took a long drive together from Texas to, I can't remember which place it was, Nashville?
Nashville, wow.
Yeah.
2003? 2003.
Yeah. And it was a long road trip in the car. And I remember Eric brought this it was 11 by 14 or something, some printout of a keyboard from Overhead Shot. And he's like, oh, I'm going to learn this piece in the car. I was like, what are you talking about? And Eric was saying that he would look at the notes on the page and then imagine and visualize himself playing it on the keyboard. And I just remember looking at Eric in the car, and he would just sit there and look at the piece of paper and the music. He was just going back and forth. I was like, what is he doing? And Eric, I'm sure you can elaborate on this, but what I learned was that you can actually visualize what's happening with your hands in the music as they're playing it. Can you explain that maybe a little bit more, Eric, or anything that I might have missed with that?
Yeah. So as we have a lot of ways to know music, we have the, theoretical kind of analytical thing. We have the auditory thing, what does this sound like? And then maybe the biggest for percussion is what does it feel like in our hands and our muscles? Unfortunately, just kind of the nature of kinesthetic memory, I feel, is that in a performance situation, that's often the first one to go, Mm-hmm. And you start to get a little nervous, and then because it's so much more of a, you're less conscious of the kinesthetic memory, it's a little more of a background thing, and things start to get a little weird with your body. You can forget stuff.
This is the moment when you're playing something and then you break and you're trying to get back into it and you can't, and then you have to go back to like letter C in order to get back into the music. That means you don't really know the music of what you're playing. You were just kind of on autopilot and your hands were doing the work. That is a very dangerous line to walk. Yeah. We've all been there.
If you can just remove the kinesthetic part of it entirely for a bit as you practice or as you're learning music, and even remove the oral part of it, like where you can't even really hear what you're doing, like you're really having to rely on your mind's ear, and then just focus on this visual part of it, which works really well for keyboard percussion because it's shapes and there's just this geometry to what a scales look like and what a chords look like, and as you're moving around the keyboard, there's this it's like geography, and there's this map and like all the keys, like it just makes shapes. It's very visual. So in that situation, it was that was like an 11:17 printout of a marimba. I think I actually got it at the Stevens seminar or the Stevens camp, which I think I went to that in the summer before. Maybe we went to that PASIX. So whenever that was, 2003, 2004, maybe 2005. I don't know. But
and you're experimenting with that technique, right?
Yeah, just visualization. Yeah.
I've reached a phase now where I read music. I remember I started thinking of it this way, where, the same way you would read a book, like you don't, maybe because I'm a big audiobook listener now too, but sometimes if I know the author, when I'm reading a book, I can actually hear the book being read in the author's voice. Like I can hear the sound of their voice as I'm reading their book. And I find the same thing happens now where sometimes I'll look at music and I'll read it the way I would read a book. I'm not at a keyboard. I'm just looking at the music and I can hear the music going across my head as I'm looking at it. This is very common for conductors. You're score studying, you're creating that auditory image of what you want to sound like. As percussionists, because we're just in our own little bubble, maybe you haven't tried that yet. So that might be one thing where you audiate, which means you're hearing the music in your head and you're just reading the music as you go across. Number 10, last one. If you're still watching at this point, congratulations. Thank you guys for sticking with us. These are all, I think, things that we've learned over the years, but thank you for sticking with us. Number 10 is just to let it marinate. And I say this all the time with my students, you get a steak and if you marinate it, it's going to taste different than if you just, there's some salt and pepper on top and then searing it tastes great too. But take a piece of fish, for example. You let it marinate overnight, it's going to taste better, right? And there's something that happens when you go to sleep at night. You go to sleep and it kind of consolidates all that information in your brain. It takes out the things that are not necessary. It makes sense of the things that you do need to keep. So if you're trying to cram music like the night before solo and ensemble, you might escape and get through it, but that is not the best strategy, right? You've got to give your brain some time, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, because the last thing that you want to have happen is that you have that memory slip and you didn't give it time to marinate, and you have a performance error in the moment. So give yourself some time to marinate. When you're making your practice plan, make sure you schedule that in. Okay. Let me say this. If you have any other practice strategies that you use, these are all strategies, right? And ultimately, you're going to have to experiment to see what works best for you in the practice room. But if you have a memorization strategy that you think has worked well for you, please do us a favor and leave it in the comments below of this video, because that way other people can see this and they can try it out as well. If you want to expand on any of the suggested topics or the strategies that we've already listed, we would love to hear from you that as well. And if you enjoy these kinds of videos, please let us know, because we'll keep making more of them for you. So like it, subscribe, share it. I've kind of bled into Carl's outro here. So sorry, Carl, but because I do want him to do the outro. But leave us a comment and tell us if you enjoy these videos, and we'll keep making them for you. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm going to turn it over to our resident marketing officer over here, Carl Drum Tech. Any parting words, Carl?
Learning music.
Learn your music. All right. Like, subscribe, share. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Peace.
And Carl, do you have a lesson at 11:30, just so I can keep an eye on the time?
Yeah, I got to bounce for sure at 11:30.
11:30. Okay. All right.